The salt air bit at Elowen Voss's cheeks, sharp enough to drag her back under the black, churning waves where she had drowned once before. The wooden treaty hall creaked above the tide line, its thick cedar walls smelling of damp resin and old parchment, the same neutral meeting ground where everything had unraveled in her last life. Her fingers brushed the silver navigator's band coiled around her wrist, the cold metal thrumming with the faint hum of siren magic, and she forced herself to breathe slow, in rhythm with the rolling surf beyond the open archway. She had not dreamed her death. The celestial alignment had peeled back the curtain of what had already happened, handing her this single, fragile chance to choose differently. Footsteps echoed across the stone floor behind her, deliberate and quiet, the gait of a creature who did not need to draw breath. Elowen did not turn immediately. She watched foam drag across smooth gray boulders, heard the distant cry of gulls, and braced against the memory of blood blooming in salt water. The voices of her navigator sisters cut short beneath the storm she had helped unleash by agreeing to the vampire monarch's terms. When she finally shifted her gaze, Elder Monarch Kael Rayner stood 10 paces away, his dark robe swallowing the pale coastal daylight, crimson eyes fixed on her with the quiet confidence of a man who already knew the answer he expected. Navigator Voss, Kael said, his voice low and smooth, carrying no extra warmth, no hint of the manipulation she had only recognized too late the first time they spoke her. You understand why I have traveled to this border. The Vampire Covenant requires safe passage through your restricted coastal channels. Our trade fleets cannot continue to skirt the outer storms your people command, not without losing crews and cargo each season. Elowen held his stare, her throat. She knew the lines that would follow, word for word. In her prior life, she had weighed the promise of a non-aggression pact against the risk of immediate conflict, and given consent. That choice had handed the Covenant control over critical shippings, left the siren marches visible, and opened the door for Caspian Thornsville. The lie that had lured her cohort into a vampire ambush. She could almost hear Caspian's soft voice, the half-truths he had woven to earn her. And she pushed the ghost of Kael inclined his head, delivering the ultimatum exactly as she remembered. I offer peace. Swear your voice to calm our tides, grant unobstructed travel through waters, and the Covenant will sign a treaty binding us against hostile action for a century. Refuse, and we will not wait for negotiation. Our scouts will chart those channels with essing, and blood will stain these shores before the next. A long silence settled them, broken only by water lapping against rock and the faint creak of the hull beams. Elowen felt the weight of every life that had been lost because of her old decision pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of Mar Tidecaller, her oldest friend, who had died trying to pull her free from the... She thought of the villages along the siren marches that had starved when their trade routes fell under vampire control. She knew what expected. Hesitation, compromise. She hit her chin, and she spoke, her steady, no tremor giving away how tightly her hands clenched. I cannot get passage. The restricted channels exist to protect every realm from the wild magic of deep currents, not to trade for gain. If the Covenant wishes to negotiate safer routes, we may discuss alternate paths that do not surrender our sovereignty. I will not swear my gift to guarantee your fleet's Kael's expression did not dramatically, but the air in the room grew colder, the faint tang of iron creeping her. The polite neutrality he carried vanished, replaced by sharp, unmasked defiance. That final answer? It is. The vampire monarch took one low step forward, and the shadows around his feet seeped toward her. You do not comprehend what's set in motion. I will give you 3 days to reconsider its reckless refusal. If you do not return with your agreement, that time ends. My forces will move into those coastal waters. No treaty, no warnings. Only... He without another word, his robe swung across the stone, and vanished archway. Elowen stood alone in the quiet hall, listening to the distrash of waves, knowing the old fragile truce between sirens and vampires had shattered the moment she said no. The life she had known in this reset timeline the same. She had changed one critical choice, but she could not shake the dread that every new path carried its own traps, its own betrayals of sight. Somewhere, she suspected, Caspian Thorn was already to find her, and this time, she did not know if she had the strength to resist full of old feelings, or spot the lies too late. Dawn painted the treetops pale silver when Elowen left her tide cottage before the village had fully stirred. She folded her nautical charts inside a waterproof leather satchel, strapped her obsidian blade to her hip, and slipped past the outer sentries without drawing attention. The Tide Sovereign had refused to commit troops or open negotiations with the Werewolf Council, so this journey would be hers alone. 3 days hung over her like a storm cloud, and she knew she could not wait for her people to reach consensus before she sought help from the wilds. The trail into the werewolf territory wound through thick pine forest, the air growing cooler and sharper the farther she traveled from the salt shore. Sunlight filtered through dense branches in thin slanted streaks, and every rustle in the underbrush made her pause, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of her blade. She had traveled this route once before, in her past life, but back then the journey had been a formality, a ceremonial exchange between neutral realms. Now the woods felt watchful, alive with the quiet awareness of predators guarding their borders. By late afternoon, 2 large wolves stepped onto the path ahead of her, their fur dark gray and thick golden eyes locked firmly on her position. Elowen froze, lifting both hands slowly to show she carried no immediate threat. "I seek audience with Alpha Lyra Hale. My name is Elowen Voss, siren navigator, and I come in peace." One wolf tilted its head, then turned to vanish back into the trees. The other stayed to escort her deeper into the forest, moving at a steady pace that forced her to match its stride. After another mile, the trees opened into a wide clearing ringed with low wooden cabins and stone fire pits, the central gathering ground for the northern werewolf clan. Dozens of clan members lingered around the space. Some shifted partially, ears and tails visible, others fully human as they sharpened blades or mended nets. Lyra Hale stepped forward from the crowd, broad-shouldered with a scar slicing across her left, her gaze sharp and unyielding. She did not offer a greeting, only waited for Elowen to explain herself. "Monarch Kael of the Vampire Covenant has demanded unrestricted passage through our coastal channels," Elowen began, keeping her tone calm and direct. "I refused his ultimatum, and he intends to send armed scouts within 3 days. If the vampires seize those waters, their next move will be expansion into borderlands shared with your wilds. I am here to ask for a temporary defensive." A low murmur rolled through the assembled werewolves. Lyra held up one hand to quiet them, her expression "Words are cheap, Nader. Why should my clan risk breaking long-held neutrality on the word of a siren with no proof? The Covenant has kept to their borders for generations. What guarantee do we have they will turn on us?" Elowen's tightened. She could not speak of the bloodshed she remembered from the old timeline, not without being dismissed as "I cannot bring written evidence today, but I ask for time for it. If I return with proof that vampire patrols are already mapping your edges, will your council agree to stand with the side marches?" Lyra studied her for a moment, weighing the risk before giving a "You have until the end of your deadline. Bring me tangible proof of incursion, and we will vote on a defensive agreement. Till then, you are welcome to rest in our cabin, but do not mistake this." Relief loosened Elowen's shoulders, though she understood how fragile the arrangement remained. She had bought her chance, but the burden of finding evidence fell into her. That evening, as twilight bled across treetops, a young siren runner burst into the clearing, breathless and soaked from the long ride. "Elowen?" the major gasped, doubling to catch air. "The tavern sent me. Kael's soldiers detained 3 junior navigators yesterday morning. They are being held in border coves, used as leverage to..." The ground seemed to tilt at Elowen's feet. She expected pressure, but not hostages, so quickly. Kael was not waiting to reconsider. He was already taking prisoners to bend her will. If she failed to return proof for Lyra, the young navigators would become casualties before... Lyra watched carefully, picking up on the sure. "This changes things, but it not give us proof. You will need to move fast with them." Elowen nodded, her mind already racing toward the only path left open. To find evidence of vampire incursion and plan a rescue, she would have to cross to Covenant territory. It was a dangerous gambit, one that could end with her captured just like junior navigators. There was no other choice. The line between cautious negotiation and outright conflict was fading fast, and she understood now that every decision she made something. Elowen's boots crunched over weathered seashells as she followed the winding coastal trail back toward the main siren settlement, the monarch's 3-day deadline ringing in her head with every crash of the tide. The afternoon sun hung low, gilding the surface of the ocean that had once become her tomb, and she kept a careful watch on the tree line, half expecting vampire scouts to emerge from the shadows before she reached safety. Her silver navigator's band hummed faintly against her wrist, a quiet reminder that her magic remained intact for now, though the unspoken cost of her reset lingered at the edge of her thoughts, a cold whisper she could not quite ignore. When she stepped into the underwater council cavern carved from pale limestone, the glow of bioluminescent algae lit the faces of the Tide Sovereign, and the other senior navigators gathered around a smooth stone table. Marin Tidecaller stood closest to the water's entrance, her dark hair streaked with strands of sea blue, and she crossed the space at once, her brow creased with quiet worry. Elowen recounted every word of her meeting with Kael, laying out the ultimatum and her final refusal without softening any detail. Watching the mood in the cavern shift as she spoke, the Tide Sovereign's long fingers tapped against the stone surface, his expression grave. "You understand what this means, Elowen. The Covenant will not hesitate to seize those channels by force if we hold firm. Many among us believe a limited concession is preferable to open conflict." He paused, glancing around at the other navigators. "We cannot commit fully to your choice without proof that Kael intends to escalate beyond trade routes. Right now, your warning rests only on memories no one else can verify." Elowen's chest tightened. She had feared this. No one else carried the weight of the bloodshed she had lived, and she could not reveal the truth of the timeline reset without being labeled unhinged. Myron caught her, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features, and Elowen recognized the first crack in the trust between. Her oldest friend was not ready to gamble the safety of their people on a vision only Elowen claimed. Leaving the council chamber an hour later with no formal, Elowen retreated to her small tide cottage perched on a rock, a modest home where she had spent many quiet days mapping underwater currents. She lit a beeswax candle and spread her nautical charts across the wood, tracing the forbidden coastal channels Kael did, trying to plan her next move before the 3 days. She knew she needed allies, and the werewolf wilds remained the most logical counterweight to the vampire, but she would need time to reach their council and plead. A soft knock against her wooden door pulled her from work, and Elowen's hand drifted toward the small obsidian blade she kept tucked at her waist. She had not expected visitors soon, and her pulse quickened as she stepped forward to pull the. Caspian Thorn stood on the porch, his dark hair ruffled by the open wind, his coat lined with deep burgundy fabric bearing the crest of the Vampire Covenant. He looked nearly identical to the man who had deceived her in her life. The same thoughtful set jaw, the same deep brown eyes that had once made her lower. Elowen froze doorway, every old wound flared fresh, the memory of his lies burning hot. Caspian quietly, his voice low enough that the wind nearly swallowed the words. "Monarch Kael sent me to speak with you. He hopes you will reconsider before." She gaze, careful not to let her grief or rage plainly. "There is nothing left to discuss." "My answer change." Caspian shifted his weight, leaning closer, and his next words landed like a stone dropped into still water, a phrase no other envoy had ever used with her, a line only he had whispered on the night before the ambush first life. "You do not have to carry them alone." The air bedilled. Elowen stared at him, mind racing. He remembered, or at the very least he knew something he should not. Before she could ask him for more, Caspian glanced over his shoulder to the dark tree line. "Not stay long. Be careful who you trust in the days ahead. Not everyone in the Covenant agrees plan." He turned and vanished down the winding path where she could call out, leaving Elowen stand in the open doorway, the candlelight spilling out across the damp porch. The 3-day deadline had barely begun, and already the lines between enemy and ally blurred in ways she hated. Whatever Caspian knew, he was free to speak openly, and Elowen realized with sharp clarity that this new timeline held far more secrets than she could uncover. The pre-dawn mist clung thick to the mountain passes leading into Vampire Covenant lands, wrapping around pine trunks and smoothing the jagged edges of rock. Elowen kept to the shadowed side of the trail, her satchel pulled tight against her back, the obsidian blade within easy reach. She had left the werewolf clearing while Lyra's clan still slept, carrying only a rough map of Covenant border outposts drawn by one of the wolf scouts, and a small vial of siren mist that could muffle her scent if patrols drew near. Every step deeper into these mountains sharpened her awareness. In her past life, these same slopes had been where Caspian first began planting doubts in her mind, soft lies wrapped in quiet concern, until she trusted him far more than she should have. By mid-morning, she reached a half-abandoned village on the Covenant's outer perimeter, its stone cottages shuttered, streets nearly empty save for a few robed attendants moving between storehouses. She ducked into the narrow alley between two buildings, pressing her shoulder against cold stone while she watched a pair of vampire guards march past, their voices low as they discussed increased patrols along the coast. Their words confirmed what she already feared. Kael had ordered scouts to map every hidden cove and shipping channel the sirens guarded, long before the ultimatum was ever spoken. She slipped toward the wooden administrative hut at the village center, hoping to locate written patrol logs or expansion orders that would satisfy Lyra's demand for proof. The door stood slightly ajar, and she was about to push it open when a voice sounded behind her, quiet enough that only her enhanced siren hearing called. "You should not be." Elowen spoke, blade clearing its sheath before she could think better. Caspian stood several paces back, hands raised slowly to show he carried no weapon, his expression. The morning light caught the faint purple bruise along his, a mark she had not seen during their meeting at her cottage. Her mind jumped immediately to the worst conclusion. He had come to arrest her, to hand her over to Kael and finish the betrayal he started in the old time. I should have known you would try, Elowen said, her grip tight on the hilt, her voice sharp with distrust. Are you going to call the guard now? Hand me over so your monarch can lock me away with the other navigators? Caspian's shoulders fell, and he glanced toward the road, anxious that someone might overhear their exchange. I am not here to win. I came to warn you that this hut is being watched. The patrol logs you seek were moved to the mountain citadel 3 nights ago. You will find nothing here but a trap laid for anyone sneaking across. Elowen hated, unwilling to set aside her anger so easily. All she could see was the ghost of the ambush, the sound of her friends screaming beneath churning waves. Why should I believe what you say? You already chose Kael. That is not the choice you made, Caspian. But heavy footsteps echoed from the alley, and his gaze snapped to sound. There is no time to explain. You need to leave this village immediately. You are caught. No one will negotiate. He stepped sideways, motioning toward a narrow escape path cut into the hillside. Elowen wavered, torn between chasing the proof she needed and fleeing before words arrived. Part of her wanted to press for answers, to demand the full truth of what had happened but she feared it. She misread his urgency as a ploy to chase her away empty-handed, convinced he wanted to prevent her from uncovering written evidence. Without another word, she turned and sprinted down the side trail, not glancing back to see if she made it safely back into werewolf territory. Dusk fell, but she carried no official documents, no signed orders, nothing concrete to present Lyra's counsel. Marin found her sitting on the edge of a fire pit that night, and Elowen told her about the failed mission and Caspian's. Marin's face hard frustration. You risked capture for nothing, Elowen. You let your old grief over Caspian cloud your judgment. We cannot afford to keep gambling on hunches and half-secrets while 3 navigators. The rift between them warmed. Elowen snapped back that Marin could not understand what she carried from the reset timeline, and Marin retreated without another word, leaving Elowen alone with her threat. Before she planned her next move, a messenger found her, bearing an urgent note sealed. Elowen broke the wax seal, her throat going dry. The Werewolf Council had called an emergency vote. Without tangible proof of an aggression, many alphas were pushing to abandon their tentative pact and remain fully neutral. If the vote passed, she would lose her only potential ally before the 3 fired. Worse, Kael's messengers had already ridden across all 3 realms, labeling Elowen a fugitive, a troublemaker endangering the fragile peace between species. Every door she hoped to open was being to slam shut, and her own mistake in misjudging Caspian had left her with almost fix-it. Elowen stayed awake long into the night, turning over every fragment of her failed mission while the campfire burned down to glowing embers. The note from Lyra sat crumpled in her palm, each line reminding her how little time remained. She could not ignore the memory of Caspian's bruised jaw, the way he had hurried her away before guards arrived. If he had truly wanted her captured, he could have called for reinforcements the moment she drew her blade. A quiet, uneasy suspicion settled over her. She might have written him off too quickly. Before dawn, a wolf scout found her with word that Caspian waited alone at a neutral cave marking the border between werewolf and covenant lands. He had asked specifically to speak with her, and Lyra offered safe passage for one meeting, though she warned Elowen it could easily be a trap. Elowen hesitated only briefly. She needed answers, and this might be her only chance to hear them before the Werewolf Council voted. The cave sat tucked beneath an overhang of granite, cool and dim, with a narrow mouth that faced away from Covenant patrol routes. Caspian waited near the back, his cloak pulled tight around his shoulders. When Elowen stepped inside, he did not move toward her, as if he understood she still feared him. You came, he said softly. I need the truth, Elowen replied, keeping several paces between them. In my past life, you handed my cohort over to Kael. I watched them die. I died beneath those waves. Why? Caspian's gaze dropped to the stone floor, and for a long moment he said nothing. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of quiet guilt. Kael held my younger sister's life over. She was dependent on ancient blood magic only he could grant. If I refused to help him lure your group into the ambush, he would have let her fade away. I had no good choice. I chose the lesser evil, or what I thought was lesser at the time. I have carried that every day. Elowen froze. She had never imagined coercion as the root of his. All her grief, all her rage, had clung to the simple image of a man who had freely deceived. The truth fractured everything she believed. He never told. Caspian on. Most nobles in the Covenant believe I acted out of anger. Only Kael and I know the bargain. As Caspian pulled a folded scrap of aged parchment from inside. It was a partial copy of the ancient treaty, forged between the three realms more than a century prior. He pointed to a clause written in faded ink at the bottom of it. If Siren and Covenant hostilities break into war, the werewolf wilds hold legal claim to all contested border territories abandoned by either side. Caspian aloud. Kael this. He is not only chasing shipping lanes. He hopes conflict will push Sirens back from frontlands, letting him seize coasts while the werewolves take inland ground. He intends to reshape every borderline across. Elowen stared at the text, understanding finally how broad the threat truly stretched. The old treaty had been forgotten by near everyone, buried in archives, and Kael had kept it secret to manipulate. When she returned to the werewolf clearing with the copy, Lyra studied it carefully alongside the clan's oldest. The document held enough weight to pause the council vote. The Alphas agreed to delay their decision another day, giving Elowen a narrow window to build. Still, the atmosphere across the gate felt heavy. Every faction now understood the fragile peace could never be restored to what once had been. Trust had eroded too deeply. Old agreements, hidden traps, and Kael's plan stretched far beyond. A runner arrived at sunset, breathless, carrying a message from the Kael had formally mobilized his army. Vampire battalions moved towards the coastal border, and the 3 captured navigators would be used as hostages to force surrender once his force reached the shore. The moment for quiet negotiation passed. War loomed close enough that Elowen could almost taste the iron tang of coming end. She looked out over the forest toward the distant mouth of the Covenant, knowing every choice from this point forward would ripple across all 3 realms. Her reset had bought a second chance, but it had not erased the danger. If she failed now, the slaughter of her first life would repeat, and this time, the conflict would spread far wider than the sea. The weight of coming war settled thick over the werewolf clearing by the next sunrise. Elowen spread the partial treaty copy across a rough wooden table for Lyra and the clan elders, debating how to use the clause against Kael without handing the wilds free rein over contested lands. Before they could settle on a plan, a frantic wolf scout burst through the tree line with terrible news. Vampire raiders had struck an isolated Siren Tide village overnight, and Marin Tidecaller had been captured while organizing the evacuation of civilians. Elowen's blood ran cold. Marin had been her closest confidant for decades, the one person who had stood beside her through every storm, even when she doubted Elowen's choices. She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened, every memory of their shared journeys beneath the waves rising to the surface. The enemy was no longer just threatening navigators. They were seizing anyone who might rally Siren resistance. Lyra's expression hardened. My clan cannot commit warriors to a rescue yet. The council remains split, and many alphas fear direct battle with the Covenant before we secure our borders. I can spare 2 scouts to guide you through hidden mountain passes, but no soldiers. The rest is yours to manage. Elowen nodded, accepting the limited help. But another dread began to creep in as she lifted her silver navigator's band. The faint thrumming hum she had grown used to felt weaker, quieter than it had only days before. She tried to summon a small wisp of siren mist, the simple magic she used to mask her trail, and barely a thin curl of silver fog drifted from her palms before dissolving. A quiet panic coiled in her chest. This was the hidden cost of her timeline reset, the secret price the celestial alignment demanded for granting her a second chance. Every major divergence from the original fate drained her siren magic bit by bit. If she kept altering events, she would eventually lose the gift that made her a navigator, the power that might turn the tide against Kael. Without, she would be just another fugitive with a blade and a stack of paper. That evening, as she sat alone by the fire, trying to map a route to the Covenant prison outpost where Marin was, a messenger found her bearing a sealed note. The wax bore Caspian's personal, separate from the royal crest of the Elder Mark. She broke open, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. Caspian offered to help infiltrate the Citadel and free Marin, but only if Elowen agreed to hear Kael's final, formal proposal. Elowen had to meet Kael again meant walking straight into the heart of enemy territory, a trap that could end with her imprisonment alongside Marin and the junior navigator. Yet without Caspian's knowledge of the Citadel layouts and guard rotations, a rescue attempt would almost certainly fail. Her allies were her magic ding, and time continued slipping away. Direct military confrontation was no longer a viable path. She needed political leverage, internal division inside it, not a bloody fight. She crumpled the note loosely in her hand and stared toward the dark line of mountains marking the Vampire Covenant. If she accepted Caspian's offer, she might free Marin and uncover more evidence to turn Covenant nobles against. If she refused, Marin might never leave captivity. The old plan of defiance and defensive alliances had reached its point. She would have to play Kael's political game on his. A cold wind swept through the pine trees, stirring the campfire embers upward into the night. Elowen tucked the note inside her satchel and reached for her Ebsen blade, bracing herself for what came next. Her second chance was unraveling faster than imagined, and the magic that defined her was slipping away with every. Whatever bargain Caspian proposed, whatever trap Kael made waiting, she had no choice but to step forward. The mountain air turned sharp and thin as Elowen followed Caspian along narrow, shadowed switchbacks toward the vampire citadel. They traveled under the cover of dark cloud, with no moon or stars to cast light on their path. Caspian had brought a hooded cloak dyed in muted charcoal for her, fabric woven to muffle siren magic and hide her scent from vampire sentries. Elowen pulled it tight around her shoulders, her silver navigator band cool against her wrist, the faint hum of her magic weaker still after days of shifting the timeline. Caspian spoke in low, clipped tones as they climbed, laying out the layout of the citadel's lower prison wing. The captured navigators and Marin were held in separate cells, isolated to prevent them from combining their siren voices to break free. Most guards on this shift owed loyalty to moderate Covenant lords, not directly to Kael, a crack they might use to slip inside unseen. "We have a small window before dawn," Caspian explained, pausing beside a moss-covered stone archway that served as a forgotten service entrance. "Once we free the prisoners, we will move through the noble antechambers. I have copied internal records proving Kael has spent decades hoarding border maps and planning territorial expansion, violating the old Covenant laws." Elowen studied his face, searching for any hint of deception. "Why risk everything for me now? If Kael discovers your betrayal, he will kill your sister." Caspian's jaw tightened. "My sister's condition has stabilized for now, but Kael will never release. I have spent too long acting as his tool. If we can rally the moderate lords against him, there may be a chance to break free of his hold permanently." They slipped through the narrow passage into the citadel. Stone corridors echoed softly with distant footsteps, torches burning with low orange. Caspian led her past storehouses and empty guard posts until they reached the iron-barred cell. Marin lay on the stone floor of her cell, and her eyes widened when she spotted Elowen in the dim. A quick gesture from Caspian silenced. He produced a thin iron key, stolen from a sleeping guard, and unlocked. Marin stepped out quietly, shock giving way to wary relief when she saw who got them. Together they freed the 3 junior navigators, moving them toward the exit while Caspian lingered long enough to retrieve a locked leather chest, holding the Covenant records he had. As they turned, a deep voice cut through the. "Caspian Thorne, Bose." A senior guard stood at the far end of the hall, flanked by 2 more warriors. Word of their infiltration had spread faster than expected. Caspian pushed the escaped navigators and Elowen forward toward the. "Take safety. I will." Elowen hesitated, unwilling to abandon him, but Marin took her arm. "We cannot waste." Elowen led the group back down the mountain trail, reaching the werewolf border as dawn painted. Hours later, a frantic messenger arrived from within. Caspian had heard. Kael had learned his treason, and the sentence was ritual blindment. Slow, agonizing punishment reserved for nobles who. Elowen spread the stolen documents across Lyra's table. The scrolls detailed Kael's planned invasions, secret deals with border raiders, and proof he had deliberately hidden the forgotten treaty clause for years. When word was sent to the moderate vampire lords, several replied quickly, agreeing to attend a formal inter-realm tribunal. The rest succeeded. Marin and the young navigators were free, and Elowen had secured powerful written proof of. But the victory came at a price. Caspian was imprisoned, a grim fate, and Kael now knew his own noble faction had been drawn, and there would be no more quiet bargaining bars. The tribunal would decide the fate of 3 realms, and Elowen understood that every faction would come ready to fight for what they believed was theirs. Plans for the inter-realm tribunal consumed the next 2 days. Elowen worked alongside Lyra's clan elders and 3 moderate vampire lords, organizing witnesses, copying the stolen Covenant records, and mapping out neutral ground where the hearing could unfold without ambush. The celestial alignment drew near, its faint luminous glow visible along the horizon after sunset, and Elowen felt her siren magic grow fainter by the hour. The cost of rewriting fate continued to wear her down, but she could not pause now. The tribunal was their best chance to strip Kael of authority, without plunging every realm into total war. On the eve of the gathering, a messenger slipped into the werewolf camp bearing word from inside the citadel. Kael had uncovered an ancient deep-sea rift, a place where raw, untamed primal magic pooled beneath the waves. His final plan was no longer limited to trade routes and borderlands. He intended to use captured siren navigators' voices, and whatever magic he could force from them, to crack open the rift and claim its power for the Vampire Covenant. The navigators had been moved once more, this time to the coastal cove directly above the rift site, held ready for the ritual once the celestial alignment peaked. Shock rippled through the assembled coalition. All their careful preparation for the tribunal suddenly felt secondary. If Kael unlocked that primal magic, no army, no treaty, no alliance would stand a chance against it. Lyra called an emergency council that night. The werewolf alphas voted formally to join the defensive coalition. The moderate vampire lords committed their personal guards to block Kael's loyalist soldiers. The Tide Sovereign, finally convinced of the threat, sent a small contingent of siren navigators to join Elowen. The loose alliance hardened into something solid, every faction setting aside smaller grievances to stop the ritual. Still, divisions lay. The werewolves would not forget the hidden treaty clause, and the siren lords worried about surrendering too much authority in any new peace deal once Kael. The whole coalition marched toward the neutral tribunal grounds, a broad plateau halfway between the forest and the coastal. Delegations from all three realms assembled, banners raised, guards posted along every. Kael arrived last, flanked by his most loyal warriors, his expression cold and He did not bother denying the evidence laid before him, nor did he attempt to negotiate. He openly declared that the old peace had weak, and new power belonged to those bold enough to. As arguments unfolded before the tribunal, scouts raced back with urgent. Kael had split his forces. While the tribunal occupied everyone's attention, his main column moved toward the coastal rift to begin the ritual before sunset. The celestial alignment was reaching its apex, amplifying every form of supernatural magic across the realms. Tide magic, lunar power, vampire strength, all of it would swell to its peak in a matter of. Elowen closed her eyes for a heartbeat, weighing the tribunal. Stopping the rift ritual had first. She turned to the allied leaders, her voice clear enough to carry across. We move post now. If that was opened, none of our treaties or Lyra nodded sharply and signaled her werewolf warriors forward. The moderate vampire lords ordered their guards to march beside them. The fragile coalition is one, racing toward the storm-lashed shoreline where Kael planned to rewrite the balance of. Behind her, Elowen felt the last thin thread of her siren magic hum weakly. Whatever final confrontation would rift, she would have to face it with power, and a choice that would define the future of every realm. Storm winds tore across the coastal cliffs as Elowen and the coalition crested the final ridge. Gray-black waves crashed against jagged rock, sending sheets of salt spray upward into the air. Far below, at the mouth of the hidden cove, Kael's loyal guards formed a tight circle around a ring of bound siren captives. The deep-sea rift glowed faintly beneath the churning water, its primal magic thrumming in time with the peak celestial alignment overhead. Kael stood at the water's edge, his dark robe snapping violently in the gale. He turned as the coalition descended the slope, crimson eyes sweeping over werewolf warriors, rebel vampire guards, and siren navigators marching side by side. A low, humorless laugh carried over the wind. You bring an army to stop what is inevitable? Kael called out. The old treaties shackle us all. This rift will grant the Covenant strength enough to rule these shores, and no fragile alliance will stand in my way. Elowen stepped to the front of the coalition line, her silver navigator band cold and nearly silent against her wrist. Her magic had faded to almost nothing, the toll of rewriting fate heavy in her bones. She raised the stack of stolen Covenant records and the ancient treaty parchment for every faction to see. You seek power built on captivity and lie, she shouted over the roar of the tide. The lords of your own Covenant have seen your maps, your secret plans, the lives you threaten to bend others to your will. This is not liberation. It is conquest. Kael waved a hand, and his guards dragged a figure forward from the rear of his formation. Caspian. His clothing was torn, skin marked by the punishment of ritual blood confinement. Yet his gaze met Elowen's steady. Caspian Thorn will testify, Elowen said, turning toward the assembled crowd of lords and alphs. He can tell every soul here how Kael used his sister's life to force betrayal in the old time. Caspian lifted his voice, clear even above the. He spoke of blackmail, of impossible choices, of decades watching Kael manipulate treaties and plan expansion. One by one, several vampire nobles stepped away from Kael's side, abandoning their monarch entirely. His loyal force shrank before everyone's. Enraged, Kael lunged toward the bound siren captives, intending to force their voices open the rift before he lost all control. Lyra signaled her werewolf warriors to charge, while the rebel vampire guards engaged Kael's remaining loyal. Steel clashed against steel. Snarls echoed over the and the captives were pulled free from the circle before Kael could. Kael tried to channel the rift's raw magic into himself, but without siren voices to guide it, the power lashed out uncontrollably. A wall of churning seawater surged upward, forcing him back for shore. The primal magic rejected his storm. One of the senior vampire nobles stepped forward and formally stripped Kael of his title as the authority he had held for centuries dissolved in the guards moved in to restrain him, his fight spent. The immediate threat of the rift ritual faded as the celestial alignment slowly began. The battle quieted, wounded tended and prisoned. Elowen looked out across the uneasy gathering of realms. The war they had raced to prevent and avoided, but nothing could return to the old peace. Every border, every agreement, every trust had been fractured beyond full repair. They would need to write an entire treaty, one forged with full honesty between sirens, vampires. Caspian limped toward her, weak from his punishment, and gave a faint. The cycle of betrayal Kael had nurtured was broken for now. Yet Elowen felt the near total absence of her in magic, understanding that the greatest sacrifice of her second chance had only just was won, but the work of rebuilding was only beginning. The storm slowly withdrew from the coast, leaving behind damp stone and the sharp tang of salt and iron. Wounded were carried away to makeshift healing camps, loyalist guards placed under watch, and Kael confined within a secured outpost to await judgment from the reformed Covenant Council. The celestial glow along the horizon faded, the alignment that had gifted Elowen her second chance finally broken. With it, the last faint thrum of siren magic slipped away from her silver navigator's band. She lifted the bracelet, turning it in pale daylight. It was plain metal now, no hum, no trace of the power that had defined her for most of her life. The price of rewriting fate had been paid in full. Marin found her standing alone at the cliff edge, staring out across the open sea. She rested a gentle hand on Elowen's shoulder, no trace of the old tension between them remaining. You saved us all. Even if the magic is gone, your choices matter more than the gift you lost. Elowen nodded, though grief settled soft and heavy in her chest. She would never again map hidden currents or weave siren mist to hide her trail, never speak to the tides as she once had. Still, she breathed, and her friends lived, and the three realms stood on the edge of something new rather than ruin. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, delegates gathered repeatedly on the neutral coastal plateau to draft a new treaty. The old hidden clauses were struck from every official copy, laid open for all to read. The werewolf wilds secured formal rights to their ancestral borderlands without needing to seize territory through war. The Vampire Covenant restructured its leadership, placing power in the hands of a council rather than a single monarch, with Caspian chosen as one of its representatives, tasked with mending broken ties between realms. His sister was freed from the blood bargain Kael had enforced, her health tended by healers from all three peoples. The siren marches kept sovereignty over their coastal channels, agreeing to set up shared trade routes open to vetted merchant fleets from both the Covenant and the Wild. No faction gained unchecked. No realm was forced into surrender. Compromise shaped every line of the document, hard-won and built on trust that had only begun to. On the day the treaty was signed, Elowen stood beside the other delegates, her navigator's band still wrapped around her wrist as a memento rather than a tool. Caspian met her gaze across the assembly, a quiet understanding passing by. They had both carried heavy guilt from the old time, both fought to break the cycle of manipulation and betrayal Kael had. There would be no easy ones, no quick forgetting of all the blood and loss, but there could be respect and cooperation, and a future free from the lies that had destroyed their first chance. Once the signatures filled, Elowen walked away from the plateau and back along the trail toward her tide cottage. She would not serve as a navigator anymore, but she could still the sea, still advise the tide sovereign on diplomacy, still teach younger sirens to guard their waters without resorting to isolation or violence. Her second chance had not given her a ending, nor had it erased every sacrifice. It had given the realms the opportunity to choose differently, just as she had chosen differently that day in the cedar treaty hall beside. As sunset painted the waves in hues of and rose, Elowen sat on her porch watching the tide roll in and out. The past could not be undone entirely. The ghosts of those who died in the old timeline always linger, but she had stopped history from repeating its. The loop was broken. Ahead lay uncertainty, compromise, and slow, careful peace. And for the first time since she had drowned beneath the waves, Elowen Voss could breathe without waiting for the next betrayal to arrive.